Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Hannah Delmet, Concordia's Senior Director of Partnerships, and our esteemed panel.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here in Lexington and online. I'm looking forward to today's conversation. It continues a theme here at Concordia around food waste. And we know from some sessions yesterday that this is a global challenge. I believe Paul Henderson said $2.6 trillion go to food waste globally. But this session is really going to focus on U.S. food waste, and with the addition of Commissioner Quarles, who I'll introduce in a moment, really look at what's going on in Kentucky. I also do want to acknowledge we have this great scene setter slide from X for I, or X for Impact, and it's talking about the life cycle of food waste at a state level. So you can see KY in there, of course, but also several other states. My own home state of Iowa is up in there. And so really this is something that states need to be tackling, and we can be learning from each other. And so this panel is meant to really talk about some state level initiatives and what can be scaled out, what's working and what might need a little bit more collaboration to be addressed. So without further ado, allow me to introduce my panel who's going to walk us through this. We have Maggie Lyons. She's the Managing Director of Ag Tech and Consumer Goods for SAS Institute. Ryan Cooper, Director of Circular Economy Solutions and Organics Recycling Lead for Rubicon. Fun fact, this is also my title in my house, so I really like it. And then Commissioner Ryan Quarles for the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. So thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Great. All right, let's kick it off. We are going to talk about specific business initiatives, but first, again, I want to start at the society level, the individual level. What do you think, how can we talk about food waste as individuals, as eaters, I guess, consumers, wasters? You know, can we share a little bit in this panel about kind of the state of play in the United States and Kentucky in particular? And I'll kick that off to anyone.
Well, let's define the issue first. 40% of all prepared food ends up in a trash can. And that's just an amazing statistic. And I did a little research last night watching Comedy Central. And I found out the following statistics. If you were to add up all the food that goes in the dumpsters and the landfills every year in America, it would fill up 730 NFL-sized football stadiums every single year. Then if you equate that down to individuals, every American on average throws away about 20 pounds of food per month. And that adds up really big. It's over $160 billion worth of prepared food, perfectly edible, perfectly safe, ends up going to waste. This is something that has increased in society since it's actually doubled since the 1970s. I think that's because of a couple things. Number one, back after World War II, half of all the food that was eaten in America actually came from backyard gardens, did not come from a grocery store. And so you already had this mindset of conservatism, waste not, want not in America. And I think the second thing that's really contributed to this is that we've become such a consumer-oriented society. We're package-oriented when we go to a grocery store. We're package-oriented when we go through a food line, et cetera. And as less people cook and we're become more dependent on restaurants and prepackaged meals, tossing it has just become culturally acceptable.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, and if anybody else knows this as well, but I'm curious if that stat around individual food waste, household food waste, how COVID might have addressed it. I'm thinking about all the to-go orders that people had. Did that shift behaviors, patterns at all? And maybe we don't know anecdote or statistics from a data-driven perspective, but anecdotal.
I think it's a great question. I mean, the same data, right, but flipped maybe and talking about it in a different, framing it in a different way. The last research that I saw from USDA on home food waste was around 30%, right? So 30% of that food that comes home, and I don't know if there's been published research that quickly to really see this lasting.
Well, that's a project for any of the PhD candidates out there working on this. So,
It's an incredible amount of food. It really is.
And certainly a lot more packaging went to waste with all the to-go food, but that equates to about $1,500 per household per year in America, and it's the #1 source of food waste. So, businesses and food manufacturing, agricultural, farms and other operations do contribute to food waste, but the #1 source is actually at the home. And so, when you talk about municipal composting or anaerobic digestion, organics recycling programs, those are very, very important. So I think there's about 188, about 200 communities in the United States that do offer organics recycling at the curb, but it's, there's a lot of room for improvement there.
Another thing to keep in mind is that when you talk about food waste, it's not just the actual food going into the landfills. It's actually, you're wasting the labor, you're wasting the transportation costs, you're wasting the fuel, the sweat equity that was put into taking that crop from that farm gate to somebody's dinner plate as well. And so you got to keep in mind there's economic costs beyond just what do you do with a 730 football stadiums worth of food going in the dumpsters every year.
It's a very, the chain, the system itself has many points of fracture and fissure, and I think it requires interventions at every one of those. Thinking through, do you think the average consumer knows about that $1,500 a month statistic? What is the role of education in a cultural shift around food loss and food waste?
It's absolutely humongous. I think that equates to just leaving one of your bags of groceries out of 3, so just might as well just leave it at the grocery store. And
that'd be an interesting marketing campaign.
And so there is, we saw a commercial about food waste at the Super Bowl this year. Yeah. The fact that education is coming forward, and in that case from a private source, but education is absolutely number one in my book. And so one of the ways to do that could be at schools, because if you get people into the habit, I think that's what we're all aiming at, is that just like 100 years ago, or lots of people today, they know that food should not go to waste, but it has to become a habit and become the norm.
I would agree. I think starting at the school level is paramount, because right now, if you go, the biggest buyer of food in every county in Kentucky is the school system, period. So if you want to start changing norms, start shifting cultural interpretations about what we're trying to accomplish here, you got to start with our school systems. I do a lot of work with our school systems, trying to get local food onto the menu. School lunch can be challenging sometimes, but sometimes I'll go into school cafeterias. They're mandated to have food put on their plate that they know they're not going to eat, and it goes straight into the trash can, sometimes literally before they sit down. Sometimes I've seen trash cans next to the food line, and the kids know that it's not going to be consumed, and it's just tossed right there. Another thing to keep in mind is on more of an adult consumer educational effort, is to remind folks that food doesn't have to look perfectly the same in order to be edible. We call these seconds a lot of times. We have some great organizations like Glean Kentucky and our Farms to Food Banks Trust Fund with Feeding America and Feeding Kentucky, where we actually take perfectly great food that didn't make it to the grocery store. It might have a small blemish on it, and a lot of American consumers, when they go to the grocery store, and if it's not a perfect size apple or perfect size cucumber, they automatically think there's something must be wrong with this, and that's simply not the case. And so a lot of times people throw stuff out that is perfectly edible. And I'll tell you another thing that we need to do better with our food marketers is clearing up misconceptions about food labeling.
Yes.
You go to a grocery store today, you see a best by, use by, sell by.
It's really confusing.
And it's like planned obsolescence, right? And so for us, we've been working with our grocery stores and our food marketers to say, let's come up with a simpler message that still informs people about when they probably should use this. But a lot of food is thrown away that is perfectly edible just because there's confusion about a date that's on the side of a package. And just real quickly, in Kentucky, there's only 2 food items that are mandated by law to have a sell-by date on it: shellfish and dairy products. Everything else is a suggestion. It's simply a suggestion.
I feel like both both of the Ryans are talking about a lot of policy issues that I feel like we could probably spend a ton of time unpacking. But I think that the point about schools and the point about the imperfect foods, and we're seeing so many more startups and new companies who are really starting to tackle this and start to talk about, ugly fruits and vegetables, right? And those nutrients are the same, the value to the consumer and the nutrition value is all the same. But I think that the school point is really important, and those programs that are run on the federal level but administered by Ryan's office and offices across the country, the state departments of agriculture, are so important. And the farm to fork, the movement of trying to really work on those local programs to help school children to go out and to plant the fruits and vegetables, to harvest the fruits and vegetables, to get them on their plate, to learn how to cook them, right? And then to bring those skills back home, because I think that one of the most stunning things about the 730 NFL stadium stat, which I haven't heard, which is a great one, is the fact that we have people who are hungry every day in this country.
Right.
And so we've got an amazing,
mismatch.
it's a total mismatch, right? And an amazing problem that we obviously have the resources to solve, but haven't been able to figure out how to do it effectively.
Absolutely solve hunger. You mentioned Starbucks, and I want to move this into a direction where we're starting to talk about what the role of business is in this challenge set as well. How can we incentivize businesses? What steps are businesses taking when it comes to their own food waste or their food systems chains? What's changing? What are we seeing?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. At SAS, something that we do really well with analytics and looking at data is how we bring in and give companies an accurate forecast of what they could expect to sell, right? Okay. And so how do you think about the demand planning and who is coming into that grocery store, right? What they're going to buy, and then to help those businesses make buying decisions about how much they need, right? So they don't have empty shelves. They don't have consumers who are going to a different.
Are you seeing behavior change from that data?
Well, I don't know if we're seeing behavior change yet, but I think that if corporate businesses that are providing food to consumers are doing a better job about buying how much they need, it frees up more to go to schools or to go to food pantries or to be distributed across that food value chain in a way that could be more effective and could decrease shrink even at the grocery level. So that's something that's a problem, that one way that we're trying to tackle it at SAS, when you can overlay a bunch of different data sources and try to come together and help our customers and help businesses make data-driven decisions, as opposed to, man, it feels like we ordered too much lettuce this week, right? So that's one of the ways that SAS is working on it with some of our customers.
Ryan, how are you seeing this with some of Rubicon's customers?
So there are lots of places to capture that data, and nobody's in the business to create waste, but there's that interplay. You're exactly right, Maggie, that you want to have enough, but you don't want to over order, but you need to have enough, and so there's almost always going to be something left over. And so there's just so many interventions. Some of the really cool technology is making sure that either individual items or whole pallets of items are, the temperature, the time, the conditions are logged. And so that material can, maybe instead of sending that, to the other side of the country, that one stays local because it's got to be sold first. So there's all these interventions, right there at the business. There's technology to capture what exactly is being wasted and how much, and then that can inform the ordering. So there's lots of ways to capture that data, and that's everybody's goal, is to eliminate the waste in the first place.
And on the government side, of course, if there are levers that we can push and pull to incentivize companies to get a tax credit or a tax deduction for donations, that's definitely one way you can help kind of change behavior. Because that's one thing, we were talking earlier, it's easy to say no, I don't want to donate food. That's the easiest decision. A lot of people think there might be liability concerns if you donate.
We talked a lot about the Good Samaritan Act in a roundtable yesterday, which is supposed to protect against that liability, but it sounds like there's still the reticence.
To today, we don't know of a single lawsuit in America where someone received a donated food item that sued because they got sick. But yet there is a chilling effect sometimes out there by grocery stores, restaurants, etc. We don't want to donate because of legal liability. Here in Kentucky, back in 2017, we actually changed the law. Kentucky has, we think, the strongest food donation law in America now.
Okay.
Basically, anyone who donates is protected from civil liability. And that's good because we actually found a grocery store chain that was throwing away food in a dumpster because their legal team recommended, hey, we just want to prevent lawsuits. So we changed the law. We're changing the culture of giving in Kentucky as well.
Was there any pushback to that law, or was that process pretty obvious? People are like, this makes sense?
It was more so educational than anything else because people just didn't know. And as an attorney, we want to make sure that our laws reflect the behavior and what sort of parameters that our companies are going to be working between. And so for us, we actually kind of led the nation, and other states have copied and pasted what we've done in Kentucky. We're really proud of that. And we're just kind of making sure we're trying to chip away at the barriers of generosity, barriers of charity, so that we make sure that we're diverting food that would otherwise go into a trash can to our food pantries or to our food banks as well. Because there's two things. You can either divert food, or you can try to figure out a better way to compost it instead of throwing it into a dumpster as well. And we were talking earlier, we think that the role of digesters in America might really take off. We're in bourbon country. We have a lot of distillers grain. We have too much of it. We're feeding it to our livestock right now. We have bourbon beef now. But we simply need to figure out a better way to digest organic material.
I think that's very important, is distinguishing the types of food waste. And so, of course, we follow the EPA food recovery hierarchy, where first you try to eliminate it, then you try to get it to people in need, but there are materials that people are not going to eat. Now, there's a very cool movement, the upcycled food movement, where maybe you can make a granola bar out of the stillage, but, barring creating value add, first it's feeding animals, and then we think of composting and anaerobic digestion as, again, which one should the material go to create the highest and best value. And then no matter what, even after the anaerobic digester and you're creating renewable natural gas, you can create compost with that digestate and then get those nutrients back into the soil so that it's
and there's an economic byproduct. You're selling energy on top of it.
It's a win-win-win. Yep. And you're reducing the greenhouse gases that the landfills are emitting, which is one of the biggest reasons there's such a focus on carbon reduction, that we're having this conversation. So it's a great intersection.
I really like to see some of the collaborations between restaurants and farmers where there's this knowledge exchange, right? The kitchen team is in the fields, understanding planting, preparing menus for the season, and then the compost returns back as well. So you have this kind of beautiful loop system. I think those are really
It's
great.
a really, really easy, tangible example of the circular economy. Yeah. With some of the other materials that are here in this room, it's a little harder to see that connection, but it's really simple. You eat a squash, the stem of the squash goes in the compost, goes back into the field, you grow more squash. It's very accessible.
Yep. SAS is, we have a 900-acre campus in Cary, North Carolina, and multiple cafeterias, and all those cafeterias, all the food waste is composted and goes back to our landscaping crew, right? So, I think that every company everybody's got to walk the walk if they're going to, be out there and talk the talk too. And so, I think that even those programs on such a small level, right, if we really start to increase the awareness and increase education, I think that those small things can
Because how many people work at that campus, roughly?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. Probably somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000.
I mean, that's 4,000 and 5,000 people who, when they leave SAS every single day, go back to their own homes and are thinking composting, right? Yeah. And that's behavioral change at the individual and societal level again, right? We have to remember
it's decreasing their kind of, holistic individual footprint.
And
which is great.
Unfortunately, in Cary, there's infrastructure, and in a lot of places in the United States, folks that really want to do this, there isn't the infrastructure, the anaerobic digestion or the composting facilities, and that is part of the challenge, which is that we're talking about culture change, and without standardization and access everywhere to these programs, that can cause a lot of challenge. So one of the biggest things that we're working towards, with Rubicon and on my U.S. Composting Council hat, is encouraging infrastructure so that these programs are available everywhere, because the large brands that look across the U.S., they want to create the most standardized programs possible, and if it's spotty and there's gaps, then that causes a lot of challenge.
Ryan, can you speak to a best practice that you'd want to see standardized as groups design their own processes?
Yeah, first of all, implementing organics recycling programs, and second, considering certified compostable packaging, especially because we were talking about the takeout food earlier. You can turn a bag of material that is going straight to the landfill because it's a mix of materials. If it's all certified compostable and there is infrastructure, then boom, you can turn that whole bag into landfill diversion.
There's a company right here in Kentucky, Danamer Scientific, that's actually made a lot of progress on this.
Oh, great.
They're replacing plastic packages with material that can biodegrade within a year. And just imagine if you buy a bag of chips or bottled water, that you know that plastic's going to go right back into a timely decomposition, that whether you're using it for food packages, et cetera, that you're decomposing not only food, but the package it comes in as well.
Well, I see that we are at time, but I think that is a fantastic place to pause this conversation. It sounds like Kentucky's really leading the way, both in policy, but also that entrepreneurial innovation, finding those solutions. So thanks so much to the panel for illuminating on this, and by all means, everyone start a compost bin.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.